That's the table. I had Christmas dinner there with Julian for every year that he was in the embassy. And the first Christmas there together, there were some 15 of us at the table. Then the number decreased. And so in the last Christmas we were there together, there was just Julian and I.
Julian Assange, founder of the whistleblowing platform WikiLeaks, has been arrested.
The US judiciary is accusing Assange of conspiracy.
It's unclear whether he will be extradited to the USA.
If you're going to play with fire, you're going to get burned.
Don't take on the most powerful nation in the world. Don't take on the U.S. Army.
The U.S. accuses Assange of having helped publish classified material on U.S. military operations.
That has changed the way journalism is done.
Ignorance or misplaced idealism is no longer an acceptable excuse for lionizing these demons.
They're threatening to prosecute Assange and lock him away possibly for decades. That's a blow to the very foundations of freedom of the press.
I think his life is genuinely in danger.
Light them all up.
202 traffic, 260.
Come on, fire. Hey, Roger. Keep shooting. God damn it, Kyle. All right. I hit him by head.
The behavior of the pilots is like they are playing a computer game.
1-8, Cage. Clear. Come on. Clear. Oh, it's their fault for bringing their kids to a battle. That's right.
Something this video shows us is the reality of modern war from the air. And I don't think that that has been seen before.
Blatant war crimes. On April 5th, 2010, WikiLeaks exposed them to the world.
In those records,
Julian Assange was about to become world famous.
A military video has surfaced on the internet showing a deadly U.S. attack on a group of people in Iraq.
Von der Organisation WikiLeaks.
Online whistleblower WikiLeaks.
WikiLeaks has posted this video.
The video also shows the shooting of a bus which was rushing to the scene to help. 2 children were aboard the bus, both were seriously injured.
You could say WikiLeaks was something truly revolutionary. It's changed the face of journalism.
We were first in sort of introducing this secure Dropbox where people could securely submit material. Now every medium has it.
We were sitting at the kitchen table and Julian said he wanted to start a wiki and making the information available for public analysis. I thought it was a handsome idea, yeah.
WikiLeaks posted original documents online on the condition that they were genuine and of public interest. Criticism soon arose that WikiLeaks was not acting with due caution. WikiLeaks uncovered corruption in the financial sector, environmental scandals, and war crimes. Secrets the government would have preferred to keep hidden.
I think people have a enormous misunderstanding of the work of WikiLeaks. This model allowed journalists to work with primary hard source material at a scale and with a kind of sophistication that had never really previously been done before.
I met Assange for the first time in London in the summer of 2010. Back then we had heard at Spiegel magazine that WikiLeaks had received a huge cache of secret documents. We were asked to come to London and meet Assange to find out more details. It turned out that WikiLeaks did indeed have 3 huge packages of documents, one with almost 100,000 war reports of the U.S. Army on the Afghanistan War, then several 100,000 from the Iraq War, and finally 250,000 confidential diplomatic cables from the U.S. State Department. All in all, there were 750,000 documents.
The WikiLeaks documents were at the center of unprecedented attention. Der Spiegel, the New York Times, and The Guardian were the first to join forces to evaluate the documents. Secret files that exposed the true war in Afghanistan.
German soldiers are also said to be having increasingly serious problems.
For Spiegel magazine, it's front page news. Evidence of the U.S. Secret Task Force 373 in Afghanistan, who hunt and kill of their own accord. The files also reveal the brutality of the war being waged.
Many more civilians were killed in military interventions in recent years than officially confirmed.
It was like being hit by a very large wave. It was quite a shocking experience. In 2010, I was the coordinator for counterterrorism at the State Department. It was, abundantly evident that this was going to be a diplomatic disaster for the United States.
Well, good afternoon. Do we have enough room in here? The United States strongly condemns the illegal disclosure of classified information. So let's be clear. This disclosure is not just an attack on America's foreign policy interests. It is an attack on the international community.
The damage was enormous. I mean, I'm open to the possibility that selective release might have been justified in some cases. But again, wholesale release, what sense does that make?
In Europe, the criticism was more subdued at first.
To the U.S. government, it was clear right from the start that Assange was an existential threat. I think you can put it as simply as he had crossed a line. You should never take on the most powerful nation in the world. Don't take on the U.S. Army. Don't take on the Secret Services, the CIA. If you do, you'll be met with enormous blowback. Hillary Clinton once said, "Can't we just take the guy out with a drone?"
Julian Assange set his hopes on Sweden's liberal press laws. Afraid that the U.S. would investigate him, he hoped Sweden would be a safe haven for him and for WikiLeaks. At the time, key servers were located in Stockholm. They have since been removed and relocated several times.
When he was in Sweden, and the first great releases after Collateral Murder, I did say to Julian that he ought to be careful.
A warning that proved to be well justified. In Stockholm, Assange had intercourse with 2 women, allegedly unprotected. After attempting to reach Assange personally, the women turned to the police to compel him to undergo testing for STDs. The police opened preliminary investigations into 4 counts of sexual offense. Overnight, the story of Assange the rapist hit the headlines. It would become an accusation he could never quite shake off.
Julian Assange was a rock star. Overnight, he was an asshole. And that was kind of Swedish consensus from left to right, up and down.
In the meantime, the hunt for Julian Assange and his informants had begun in the U.S.
We want whatever they have returned to us, and we want whatever copies they have expunged, erased, gone. We're not alone in this endeavor. The FBI, the DOJ are also investigating this, are also involved in this matter.
Later, U.S. investigators discovered a chat protocol on one Army private's computer. It was to become a key piece of evidence and form the basis of the present charges. The source Assange was exchanging messages with in the spring of 2010 was in Iraq. It was Chelsea Manning, then Bradley Manning, an intelligence analyst with the U.S. Army.
The two didn't know each other personally, only through their anonymous handles or aliases. They proceeded, getting to know each other cautiously, bit by bit. Then there was a new approach to communicating. Then Assange wrote, "Curious eyes never run dry." This is quoted in the Bill of Indictment, and it's a very thin line. While journalists should never incite anyone to steal or intrude to gain information, they of course do want to know what their sources can offer.
In the spring of 2019, a U.S. federal grand jury unsealed an indictment against Assange. 17 further charges under the Espionage Act on obtaining and publishing classified information soon followed. The possible sentences total up to 175 years in jail. Count 18 of the indictment, conspiracy to commit computer intrusion, better known as hacking. Assange is said to have given Manning advice on how to remain anonymous.
I believe he's closer to a spy than a journalist because his business involves stealing information. His use of information is not informed by a story, by a narrative, and by a public point that needs to be made.
They were out to destroy because he exposed war crimes, criminal activities, murder of hundreds of thousands, displacement of millions.
In Sweden, Assange was being investigated by public prosecutors for an allegation of rape. He had spent some time living temporarily with Donald Bostrom. The Swedish journalist had tried to mediate between Assange and the two women in question and also made a statement to the police.
I read everywhere that he was recovered, running away, escaping from everything. But that's not the fact. The fact is actually he went to the police, he was interrogated, then he stayed another 5 weeks waiting for the next step in the process, which never occurred.
Swedish authorities granted him permission to travel to London. Then they wanted him back for more questioning, insisting it take place in Sweden. Assange asked for assurance that he would not be extradited to the U.S. His request was denied. And so he decided to apply for asylum in Ecuador, escaping first to their embassy in London.
He arrived at 1 p.m. in the afternoon. He had his asylum petition ready to be handed.
Australian Julian Assange is currently in London in the Ecuadorian embassy.
Ecuador has granted Assange asylum, but it's unclear how he intends to get there from the London embassy. The British police are outside, ready to arrest him the moment he emerges to get to the airport.
Assange was trapped in the heart of London. And Sweden fell silent. No hearing, no charges. Then, in 2016, WikiLeaks made another major release. The DNC leaks implicated the Democratic Party. They included emails that shed a harsh light on Hillary Clinton's campaign manager.
There have been new email disclosures, once again jeopardizing Hillary Clinton's career.
The whistleblowing platform WikiLeaks has released confidential emails pointing to the DNC preferring Clinton to run as the Democratic presidential candidate instead of the outsider Bernie Sanders.
He clearly disliked Hillary Clinton. He didn't like John Podesta, her campaign manager, and he was happy to do whatever he could to damage their interests.
The whistleblowing platform WikiLeaks quoted Clinton from well-paid speeches she allegedly held before Wall Street firms.
WikiLeaks! I love WikiLeaks!
This is a case where an external actor is actually, as we would say, putting their hand on the scale and making a difference.
Was the Russian intelligence service using the principle of WikiLeaks to promote its own interest? That was part of Robert Mueller's investigation in his report on Russia's influence on the 2016 American elections. Guccifer 2.0, the name of the hacker who allegedly acquired and provided WikiLeaks with the emails. According to Special Investigator Mueller, Russian intelligence service staff who have since been indicted were behind the hacks.
I now believe that it is something like a 21st century hostile service working in collusion with the Russian intelligence services in that campaign. And I think for that reason, its reputation in the United States has been fatally damaged.
This was journalistic activity. This was in the public interest to be published. It doesn't really matter where the material came from. If it's in the public interest to publish it, you have a duty to publish it.
Donald Trump becomes the 45th president of the USA.
Trump's victory came after one of the most suspenseful election nights in U.S. history.
Donald Trump and his campaign team celebrate his victory.
After being sworn into office, Trump claims he's never heard of WikiLeaks.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear that
it's unclear what impact the WikiLeaks release had on the election results. There is no evidence that WikiLeaks knew who was behind the email dump.
WikiLeaks walks like a hostile intelligence service and talks like a hostile intelligence service. We know the danger that Assange and his not-so-merry band of brothers pose to democracies around the world. Ignorance or misplaced idealism is no longer an acceptable excuse for lionizing these demons.
You would agree with Mr. Director Pompeo, that's what he was when he made that remark, that it's a hostile intelligence service, correct?
Yes. He made himself a target for intelligence services all over the world because of the information that he was releasing. If you're going to play with fire, you're going to get burned.
The Spanish company UC Global was responsible for security in the Ecuadorian embassy. Their boss, David Morales, was a former Spanish military officer with good contacts in the U.S.
They started to put video cameras all over and change all the logs. The only goal should be protect the embassy.
In 2017, presidential elections were held in Ecuador. Having already served 2 terms, Rafael Correa, who had previously granted asylum to Assange, was unable to run again.
And cheer up. Welcome to the club of the persecuted.
Thank you, President Correa.
He was succeeded by the new president, Lenin Moreno, who sought a closer relationship with the U.S. This also changed the atmosphere in the London embassy. Security staff started confiscating visitors' bags and mobile phones. They appeared to have been tasked with collecting as much information as possible. Actress and activist Pamela Anderson would visit Julian Assange regularly. While she was talking to him, security staff apparently inspected her cell phone, noting her password on a yellow slip. Data seems to have been systematically gathered from Assange's guests. Phones were forcibly opened, private messages copied and stored without consent, observation reports compiled. The German public broadcasters NDR and WDR are in possession of internal documents. In one email, the head of UC Global writes quite openly. Another regular visitor to the embassy is Assange's lawyer, Aitor Martinez, who is coordinating Assange's defense against the U.S. from Spain.
Mr. Assange was always very concerned about being listened in on. I personally asked the security staff several times whether the cameras that were installed everywhere could also record audio. This was always denied. In the end, we had all our conversations in the ladies' restroom because Mr. Assange was so worried about being heard.
According to one of the staff, the security firm installed a bug in the ladies' room shortly afterwards, behind this box. And in the meeting room, a bug was fitted inside the fire extinguisher.
Confidential communication between lawyer and client is a fundamental right in every democratic country of the world. The bugged material seems to have ended up in the hands of North America via the Spanish security firm.
Who is X?
We believe it is the CIA.
David Morales is said to have frequently boasted to his staff about his connections to the U.S. An affidavit from a former employee states, when I asked him who his American friends were, he replied, the U.S. intelligence services.
The connection with the U.S. intelligence services, and that is really stupid. Also, these emails are confidential, belong to my company, and it's our conversation, private conversation that I have.
Spain's High Court has opened investigations on David Morales and UC Global. When approached, the U.S. authorities made no statement about the inquiry. In 2018, the security firm in the embassy was replaced. Assange's internet connection was cut for good, and hardly any visitors were allowed. It's reported that even his shaving equipment was confiscated.
I had never been involved with this case before, but then I took a closer look. I took two medical experts with me. What we saw was that Mr. Assange was actually showing all the symptoms a person normally displays when subjected to psychological torture over a long period of time. He was stuck inside the embassy for 7 years, with very little input from the outside world. He hardly received any visits, either from his lawyer or from friends. He had no internet connection.
On April 11, 2019, Ecuador allowed the British police to enter the building.
Julian Assange, founder of the whistleblowing platform WikiLeaks, has been arrested after almost 7 years' asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy in London.
He'd been right that he would be arrested as soon as he set foot outside the embassy, with the extradition order to the USA to quickly follow. In Britain, he was placed before a judge straight after being arrested and convicted within just 15 minutes. During the whole trial, the only words he uttered were, "I plead not guilty." But the judges insulted him as a narcissist, saying he was only concerned with his personal interests.
Der nichts anderes im Sinn hat als seine Eigeninteressen.
Stockholm, 2019. For 9 years, Julian Assange had been threatened with prosecution by the Swedish judiciary. Shortly after his arrest in London, the public prosecutor in Stockholm closed the proceedings due to a lack of evidence. Julian Assange is now locked up in a high-security prison in London. The hurdles to prevent extradition from Britain to the US are not especially high.
There's only one decision!
No evidence needs to be provided as long as there are grounds for suspicion of a crime having been committed. Julian Assange's extradition hearing could be one of the biggest cases in British legal history.
If these charges under the Espionage Act weren't so serious, we should actually be laughing about it. After all, receiving, processing, and releasing secret information is the daily bread and butter of journalism.
I don't believe in imprisoning journalists, but I think I could easily agree that someone who is stealing government information wholesale ought to be punished for that. I'm certainly not going to shed big tears for Julian Assange.
Of course, it's much easier to make an example of someone and to violate all their human rights when it's a person nobody likes. Destroying Assange's image, undermining and tarnishing his reputation with sexual allegations, this shady hacker label, and the half-truths rumored about him, they're all part of it. And we absorb it all through the media, and are then more willing to accept and tolerate the fact that he's being mistreated.
Dass man ihn misshandelt.
What they are doing is illegal. To incarcerate a journalist.
What's going to happen tomorrow when China demands the extradition of a Canadian journalist? What happens when Saudi Arabia does the same thing about someone living in Argentina? We are setting a precedent right now that we are going to live with for the next 100 years. And no matter what you feel about Julian Assange, the methods that WikiLeaks and everyone connected to it have pioneered have changed the way journalism is done. And if we cannot recognize that and we are not willing to protect it, I think the saddest part of this whole story is we probably don't deserve it. And as a result, we will no longer have it when we need it the most.